All right, thanks everybody for joining the City of Courtenay for our February 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting for 2021. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered and are Zooming on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. And with that, I'd like to note that due to the coronavirus COVID-19 emergency, the City of Courtenay, with authority of Ministerial Order M192, Local Government Meetings and Bylaw Processes, COVID-19 Order number 3, implemented changes to its open council meetings. In the interest of public health and safety, and in accordance with Section 1.3 of Ministerial Order number 3, M192, in-person attendance by members of the public at Courtenay council meetings will not be permitted until further notice. Council meetings are presided over by the mayor or acting mayor, with electronic participation by council and staff by live web streaming. And with that, we'll go right into our staff report and presentations. And if I get somebody to move the license to occupy amendment, that would be great.
I can move that. Go ahead, Councillor Cole-Hammond.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to move that based on the February 22nd, 2021 staff report, license to occupy amendment to permit the temporary operation of the extreme weather shelter 685 Cliff (Connect Warming Center. Council approve option 1, that the license to the attached license to occupy amendment number 3 between the Comox Valley Transition Society and the City of Courtenay for the north side of the property, having a legal description of P1D 006-102-930, Lot 3, Section 61, Comox District Plan BIP 3817, and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute all documentation relating to the amended terms of the license to occupy agreement.
Seconded.
Thanks for seconding, Councillor Hillian. I appreciate that. And I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll pass this over to Kate O'Connell, who can summarize the report and take any questions that council may have.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's a lovely day today. So you might not be thinking of the need for an extreme weather shelter on a sunny, kind of temperate day like we have today. But if you kind of recall back to the weekend of February 12th, around Family Day long weekend and Valentine's Day, it was a very different story within our community. So essentially back in December, on the last meeting of 2020, Council had received a late item of correspondence from the Transition Society and the Coalition requesting that the city look into options for the provision of an extreme weather shelter within Courtenay. At that meeting, Council did provide direction to staff to work with the Transition Society and the Coalition to identify a suitable location to facilitate the provision of an extreme weather shelter. That was on December 21st, so you can imagine with planned holidays how quick we responded. So the very next day, I met with Heather and Andrea from the Transition Society and the Coalition and got their ideas as far as what they were looking for in a location, so some criteria information. And they did have some ideas of locations that they wanted the city to consider. So essentially, the criteria that they were looking for was that they wanted something that was downtown, had a kitchen facility, washrooms, proximity to the shower program that's currently being operated at the Lewis Center, space for staff operations, and space to accommodate up to 10 shelter beds. In addition, the city had its own criteria requirements, which included fire safety, a suitable location, so complementary location, not creating too much conflict, as well as considering the time of year with many holidays planned for the coming weeks. The city's ability to operationalize the request quickly was also considered. So in the report, you'll see that we looked at 3/4-ish locations. And the reason I say it's 4-ish is because 2 of them are on the same site. But the first one was the Link Youth Center. It met all the criteria except for the suitability of the location. We have ongoing programs running for youth in that location, and we're worried about conflicts between the 2 different user groups and just an overall appropriateness of having a shelter taking place at a youth center and the potential for conflicts there. The next location was the Tolson and the Salish buildings, which were also on the Lewis Center site. So great location. Each of them individually had the appropriate amenities. However, from an operational perspective for the nonprofits that would have been running the shelter, because it was two physical buildings, you'd have a separation of the clients between the two and be required to provide double the amount of staff. So it wasn't operationally feasible. And then talking to other departments, it was also identified that there would be some upgrades required to bring those facilities into a place where they could be used for overnight shelter. So the last location that we looked at was the Connect Warming Center, which was ideal from a staff's perspective because it was already being, the operations were already being covered by the Transition Society. The location was also ideal. It's currently downtown. They're already providing day warming center services. The clientele would be very quickly informed of the availability of the overnight shelter spaces. And essentially when we got the agreement, or that the Transition Society also thought that that would be a good location, we immediately had the fire department go in to determine the safety components or the suitability for using that as an overnight facility. So from that, it was determined that although the Connect Warming Center did have most of the requirements to provide a safe overnight shelter option, it didn't actually meet all of the requirements. So you'll see under within the report, it references some mitigating requirements, including the provision of a dedicated fire warden or fire staff position that would be conducting routine fire checks throughout the night, and then would activate any type of emergency evacuation processes in the event that a fire was discovered. The extreme weather shelter, the activation of it is actually determined by a set of criteria that was, it's pretty much based on what the generally acceptable norms are for similar shelters across the province. When I looked at other cities and their activation, the criteria was not really differing in any sort of way. Basically it includes things like temperatures near zero, sleet, freezing rain, snow accumulation, sustained high winds, temperatures below -2, as well as if there is a shortage in shelter beds from other known shelter facilities in the community. So that's part of it as well. And then going on to the activation, I did mention that we had the extreme weather over the weekend of February 12th. And you'll notice in the report, it does say that we got very kind of late notice of the Transition Society's intention to activate the shelter on the evening of Friday, February the 12th. Although it had been requested that they provide advance notice and things like that, I think the push of the extreme cold weather, you know, they were very distracted preparing and trying to get as many people off the streets as possible. So the communication wasn't exactly as we would have hoped it to have been. As soon as staff became aware of the activation of the shelter, though, we immediately started to take the steps to make sure that all of those safety protocols regarding the fire warden and the fire watch were in place. So I'm happy to say that, yes, they did have a dedicated fire watch staff person right from the inception of the activation of the shelter. And subsequently, all of the staff have now been trained on the fire safety and fire coordination by our own fire department staff. So that has now all been completed. As you can see from the table in the report, you know, they've been active every day since that Friday, the February the 12th. I included some information there just on the temperatures and the snowfall that we were seeing. And then you can also see on the access beds, because they have 8 to offer, that the uptake was increasing as the public or the homeless population was becoming more aware of that as a resource or service available to them. So there were a couple nights where they were maxed out. And from my understanding is it's been quite popular and well received. The funding for the emergency shelter is provided for by BC Housing. The funding terminates as of March 31st, 2021. So the proposed amendment to their current occupancy agreement reflects that termination date. So essentially they will operate under initiate or be activated whenever one of those conditions in the extreme weather definition are present. But as of March 31st, that use will no longer be permitted on the site, and they will also have run out of funding by that time. There's no further financial implications. All of the financial components for the license of occupancy were dealt with in the previous amendments. Administratively, the coordination, the multiple departments that have now been involved, we have seen quite a significant increase in the amount of staff time that's being dedicated to supporting the Connect Center as well as now the emergency shelter. So you'll see that about 100 hours have been expended so far. And if you go into the actual amendment itself, essentially it just talks about allowing them to operate the extreme weather shelter until the end of March. It clarifies the requirement of submitting their operation/bed plan, as well as making sure they have a dedicated fire warden and staff are trained in the appropriate procedures. There is no financial component to this amendment. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, should there be any.
Thanks very much. And I just want to first say thanks to staff for being so fast. I know it did come forward to us in December, and the turnaround time, well, frankly, I think shocked some folks in town. But the feedback I've gotten from talking with Andrea Capelli and other members of the Homelessness Coalition is just how fantastic the city staff have been to work with, and really that's helped them provide services that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. I do have one quick question when you talk about funding, and this is feel free. I know it was just announced on Friday, but there was that $100 million announcement that Minister Josie Osborne made, and I kind of assume that would flow through the Homelessness Coalition, but I just wasn't sure if you'd heard of that yet.
No, sorry, Mayor, I haven't heard of that one yet, but I am looking into some other granting opportunities through the UBCM.
Fantastic, and I did get an email on that, so maybe I'll forward that to staff and council as well.
That would be great.
Yeah, and Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to echo the thanks to staff for jumping on this as quickly as possible. I know people were quite stressed in the community, thinking about the folks who were out in that extreme weather and wanting to get them under some shelter. And I just wanted to say, certainly we receive, we receive a lot of community commentary about concerns about what are we doing for our most vulnerable folks. And I think just when you note the number of staff hours alone that go into this kind of service that of course is funded partially by the province, but we're stepping up as a municipality. I think I'm hoping that people in the community will know that these services do come with a price tag to the city, and even if it seems like something very simple, like you're just opening a building, there are many, there's a lot of safety criteria, obviously the COVID protocols, et cetera, that need to come into play, and that these services don't happen without a lot of staff time as well as financial resources. So hopefully folks will realize that we are doing what we can to help out our vulnerable citizens. And thank you again for all your work on this.
My pleasure.
And I believe we've got Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks very much, Kate and staff, for all the work involved in this. You really have pulled out all the stops, and it's a tremendous credit to you and the staff for making this happen. It's maybe a good example, though, of the resolution that you presented to us last meeting with regards to asking for better coordination between provincial services and local governments in relation to these types of services. Of course, I worry that when we step up in this way, it alleviates the province, who really should bear the responsibility for all costs related to this type of thing. But I wonder if maybe it gives us a little bit of extra credibility when speaking to the province and exhorting upon them to do more to address this ongoing crisis that we have with people in the community who don't have a place to live.
All right, and And with that, I don't see any other further questions or comments. And yeah, I think again, we're in pretty good stead. My conversations with other municipalities of similar size, this is not something that is unique to Courtenay. And again, the announcement that was made on Friday kind of speaks to that. And so yeah, hopefully. I think we're really set up for success here. And again, I think the partnership that our staff have and the alignment that we have with our Homelessness Coalition really goes a long way to make sure that happens. I don't see any further questions or comments. So with that, I will poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Support.
And I'm in support as well. And I did that with no list. So I felt very comfortable. Thanks for your patience as I get used to my new surroundings here. Thanks for passing that. And that moves us on to our second item here, the 17th Street cycling facilities.
I can move this. I'll move that based on today's staff report, 17th Street cycling facilities cross-section options, council approve option 1 and direct staff to complete the design of 17th Street using the new option of parking protected bike lanes with curb extensions cross-section depicted in option 4 as the medium short-term cycling facility, that the curb protected cycle tracks and parking cross-section option 5 be depicted as the long-term cycling facility, and that council directs staff to amend the cycling network plan to incorporate parking protected bike lanes with curb extensions and curb protected cycle tracks with parking on 17th Street between Comox Road and Willamar Avenue.
Second.
Thanks for seconding that, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, and I'll pass it over to staff. Trevor Kushner.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll pass this over to Kyle Shaw, our Director of Public Works Services, to summarize the report and take any questions that council may have.
Thank you for that. I'll start by echoing Mrs. O'Connell's comments about the weather. It's been fantastic and the sun is shining, and what better day to talk about cycling infrastructure when the snow has finally melted away and we've all come out of the cold, bitter temperatures that we've been enduring over the last little bit. So with that, I'll get to it. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, I'm pleased to present the staff report, 17th Street Cycling Facilities Cross-Section Options. The purpose of this report is to present Council with cross-section optional designs for the 17th Street corridor. You will recall that in November of 2020, Council staff and the city's consultant Urban Systems met to discuss Council's priorities for bike lanes on the 17th Street corridor. The discussion included different types of cycling facilities that could be constructed within the corridor and the maintenance costs associated with each of those different cross-sections. This discussion informed staff as to Council's overall vision for the 17th Street corridor and the desire to create a protected cycling facility within it, while acknowledging other modes of active transportation by placing importance on improvements such as curb extensions, that would offer a great benefit to all multimodal user groups, and the pedestrians and the safe walks to schools would be included in that. It was also discussed that a phased approach to construction for cycling facilities would be a fiscally responsible approach to the creation of a cycling network, and indicated a preference towards option 4, parking protected bike lanes with curb extensions, as a balance between responsible asset management and infrastructure implementation. It is worthwhile noting that parking protected facilities such as the one depicted in option 4 currently are not represented within the CMP, and as such, staff are recommending the inclusion through amendment. With that, staff are recommending option 1, and in short, to amend the CMP to reflect cross-section option 4 as the preferred short, medium-term cycling facility, while recommending option 5 as the long-term approach. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
All right, and I thought I saw Councillor Frisch, but oh yeah, there he is. Excellent, Councillor Frisch.
Sorry, I just wanted to take my hand down. I might have jumped the gun, and it looked my screen didn't look as cool with the big hand in the middle of it. So, but thanks for the report, and excited to see this move forward. Well, you did speak about pedestrian infrastructure, and one thing I just wanted to point out that maybe wasn't captured in the report is that a large majority of the cost, I think it was in the neighborhood of $400,000, is actually attributed to the bump outs or the curb extensions, as we call them, which are they're useful for all modes, but especially handy when you're trying to cross a road and you're walking. So I guess I'd just like to acknowledge that this is more than a cycling facility. This is a multimodal facility that we're looking at. And I had a question about the step ups or the raised cycle paths when we get to those crosswalks. Is that occurs at the crosswalks? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, the under option 4, the cycle track would actually raise to the elevation of the sidewalk through those curb extensions, and then through option 5, which is the full build out, it would be elevated cycle track through the entire corridor.
Okay, and so is it supposed that the elevated cycle track is like a better design than the lowered one?
I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. They offer net benefits, obviously, and they differ in terms of the comfort that is provided to the cyclist or the particular pedestrian or whoever may be interfacing, similar to that of the 5th Street corridor. And then it's less reliant on parked vehicles to provide that added protection where you have the barrier curb as a raised track.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And the raised design, is it level with the sidewalk like on 5th Street?
That is correct.
Yeah, because in a lot of the designs I'm seeing around the world, it's actually there's a different level there, and for good reason. And sometimes a compromise has to be made, like we did on 5th Street. But without that difference in level, there's not really any visual indication that one shouldn't just waltz into the bike lane, or someone riding on the bike lane shouldn't just meander onto the sidewalk. And I think that's also an important piece. So something to think about moving forward. And the other little piece of feedback I was going to give was about those raised bump ups at the crosswalks. It would actually be a lot more efficient for cyclists if they didn't have to go up and down every time they went over a crosswalk. But I guess that's, you have to weigh that out with the inconvenience for people that are maybe on scooters or something going down into the cycle track and back up to the extension. So that's all I had. Thanks very much.
Excellent. And Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. And yeah, thanks to staff for this report. It's great to see another well thought out multimodal project coming before council, and even better if we're successful with getting some grant funding to support this improvement. My question was just around the piece of the proposed improvements that are between like McPhee and Willamar. They're not shown in our drawings, but there is an intersection between on Piercy and 17th that is marked in our cycling master plan, but doesn't have a crossing. And I just want to find out if that's going to be in the designs to add a crossing there. Because it doesn't make for a very useful way for kids to travel between that neighborhood area that's around Tintown and Lake Trail School or Puntledge or even Courtney L, if there's no way to safely cross 17th Street, and it's quite a busy road. So I'm just hoping that that's going to be included in the plans.
Yeah, if I can speak to that, the depiction that you see in terms of option 4 and option 5 that are presented would have been in its inception of an idea that can be duplicated over. In terms of pedestrian ways or crossings, the existing crossing is at Tull at the park. And then there's another crossing on the other side of the tracks, which would be just to the east for the continuity between the Rotary Trail. So in terms of distance between, there's pretty good representation of overall crossing across 17th Street. There hadn't been consideration for one at Piercy, but staff can certainly look into that in the future.
Yeah, I think that the Piercy is, you know, a great, safe, quiet road for kids to cycle along. It's pretty comfortable and doesn't really need many improvements. But as soon as they get to 17th Street, it's a bit of a safety issue there. And I've certainly noticed it as a driver, kids darting across there and not using the crosswalk. So it would just, it'd be good to see that as contemplated. I don't want to dictate what the designs are, but it's something that I've noticed in that area. I had another question as well. Actually, I'll let someone else go because I got to find my notes. I know there was something else I wanted to ask. Thanks.
Fair enough. Thanks, Councillor McCollum. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to staff for all the work on this. I wonder if you could comment on the concerns that the fire department have expressed. They don't like any of the designs except the first one, which doesn't have the bike lane on the inside of the parked cars. But you're recommending that we go with that design in any case. So I'm wondering if you could comment on to what extent that's an issue, whether it's been an issue on 5th Street where that design is in play, and how we mitigate that concern that they may have.
Yeah, thank you for that. Fair point. I would say that the fire department doesn't necessarily not like all of them. They've just raised some very important issues and concerns that they may have with deployment of their infrastructure in terms of setting up in the event, the unfortunate event that there was a fire. Some of those back and forth conversations as them as a stakeholder was understanding their needs from an emergent responder perspective, as well as what their hookups to fire hydrants for water flow and such look like. So those are definitely considered as part of the design and been given consideration for replacement of particular assets and movement to facilitate ease of their particular response if required.
All right, so it's not just a matter of us overriding their concerns. We're taking steps to meet them and to facilitate their operations, while at the same time recognizing this as a potentially safer option for those riding.
Absolutely correct.
Thanks very much.
Of course, I'm muting myself. I got dogs barking in the background, but Councillor Frisch, you're next. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So the design stops at Fitzgerald. That's from what I understand. And there was some contemplation about designing that intersection, which I think would be a whole lot more money and quite challenging. But am I looking at the idea of bicycle lanes going all the way down to 17th at some point? Is that in the design at all?
Yeah, correct. I don't mean to mislead council in what has been depicted. The design that's been shown is really the idea of what it would look like within the road corridor. But you can see that there would be a duplication of that particular chosen construction method all the way through the corridor, from Willamar all the way out to Comox Road. And so you're correct that as we cross Fitzgerald on 17th Street heading towards Cliff and ultimately Comox Road, you'd still see cycle track or cycling facilities with curb extensions in those intersections.
Yeah, and that would just be further down the road when we go ahead with that intersection and beyond.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, this was more about choosing a method or a path to go forward with in terms of overall design from a conceptual perspective, so that we can take that, infuse that within the CMP, and then use that as a catalyst for future design and consideration through grant application.
Okay, well that's great. And so I'll try not to get too into the weeds, but another suggestion I would make, even for this section, hopefully if we get funding, is to put some sort of bike box or something down at the intersection, just or some green paint like we use at those areas that cars and bikes both use, because I know there is a right turn specific lane now coming down 17th, turning onto Fitzgerald, and it can just get confusing for drivers and cyclists to know where everyone should be and make sure that obviously they're not in conflict. So I'll just pass that along. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. And I figured out what my other question was that came to mind when I was reading the report earlier. We're making a change to our CMP with this motion, and I know it's come up in discussions when we've looked at this project specifically, and when we've had other dialogue around our cycling infrastructure, that there are some necessary changes in the CM, or that should be made to the CMP going forward for future planning. And I'm curious if that's something that we're imagining we'll address in the short term, or if that's a project for further out.
I think if I could speak to that, and I would encourage Mr. Kushner to speak if he has more to offer. But I think that in the short term, this is an amendment to the 17th Street corridor in singularity. I know that there is desire, both from a council and a staff perspective, to look at the CMP more broadly speaking. And now that we're going to bring in particular cycling infrastructure alignment that may differ from what's currently in the CMP, there may be opportunities or other areas that we want to look at in terms of implementation or amendment to reflect this new parking protected facility.
Yeah, if I could jump in, Mayor, just to confirm that we are going to contemplate an operational review of both the CMP and the Transportation Master Plan. So Council will have both opportunities there to take a look at the plan and have those discussions with staff.
That's great. Thanks for the answers.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. The question has been raised as to whether or not we have a devoted budget for cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure that represents a percentage of our overall transportation budget. And I don't know that we do have that. I know we've got some projections going forward over the life of the cycling master plan, but I'm just wondering if staff could comment on whether that's seen as a feasibility, that over the future term we might consider a percentage budget allocation to upgrade our alternate modes in relation to the significant amount that we spend on major roads for vehicle traffic.
Trevor, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that's an interesting question, Councillor Hillian. I think it's early days yet for the second part of that question, but I think I can say that we've got a placeholder for $150,000 to be contemplated in the 2021 financial plan and operations to do cycling infrastructure improvements. But that overall question and that sustainable amount, I think we'll deal with in terms of our asset management plan. But I think that's something that staff has already talked about and contemplated. We also know that we've got some significantly large cost projects in the out years, in the 10 to 20 years. So it certainly will be something we'll come back to council with, but it will be an interesting conversation.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And Councillor Theos.
Thank you, Mayor. Question to staff in regards to a couple questions I'll pose. Just if you can elaborate on the community discussion and the public participation in this discussion. And secondly, I'm wondering in regards to the work that is being contemplated, how would that affect the utilities and all the different amenities that are underground? If I can get an answer to those two, please.
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of community consultation, not a lot of that has occurred just to date, as this is just a conceptual change and an idea in terms of what could be constructed within that corridor. If we were to go to a point of construction, there would be stakeholder engagement, cycling coalition type of conversations to understand many of those things that Councillor Frisch just talked about in terms of the interface between those user groups and how best that may be depicted or designed or constructed as we go forward. And a great point about linear assets or underground infrastructure. as we have discussed in the past, and I believe through the Lunch and Learn, we talked about the linear assets that have been renewed currently within the 17th Street corridor, being that between Fitzgerald and McPhee, there's a new road surface as well as some underground utilities that have been had useful life extensions on them. However, as you go more towards McPhee on your way to Willamar, there's some asset deficiencies that exist. And so it's about that phased approach to construction while still utilizing the corridors for their ultimate. So, you'll see as we go forward through this conversation that presenting a painted use of the corridor on the more westerly portion of it, while those assets still need to be renewed, so those alignments in terms of times can be brought forward, while investing in an infrastructure with curb extensions and such on the more easternly portion of it, where you're going to get longevity for those assets. So it's about a balance in terms of our asset management strategy, and then the implementation of net new infrastructure relative to the overall plan. So it's about a combination of not only master transportation plan, the CNP, but well as asset management overall.
Thank you for the answers, Kyle.
Excellent. I think that's been a pretty good discussion. I don't see any further questions or comments. So I'll poll council for their vote, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch?
In favor.
Councillor Hillian?
In favor.
Councillor McCullum?
In favor.
Councillor Morin?
In favor.
Councillor Theos?
Favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. And next on the agenda is the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Grant.
I can move this, Mayor. I'll move that based on the February 22nd, 2021 staff report, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Grant Application, 17th Street Bike Lanes Project, Council approves option 1 and directs staff to submit an application for grant funding for the 17th Street Bike Lanes Project through the Canada Infrastructure Program COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream, and the Council supports the project and commits to any associated ineligible costs or potential cost overruns.
Second.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton and Councillor Frisch. And I'll pass it over to staff. Trevor Kushner.
Thank you, Mayor. And back over to Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, I'm pleased to present staff report, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP grant application. The purpose of this report is to request Council's approval to apply for a grant funding through the Canadian Infrastructure Program, the COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream. The province of British Columbia and the Government of Canada have partnered to develop a COVID-19 Resilient Infrastructure Stream as part of the ICIP and in response to the effects of COVID-19 that has had on our communities across the province. The CVRIS targets capital infrastructure projects in communities that will increase the safety of its residents as well as improve active transportation within those communities. Based on Council's 2019 to 2022 strategic priorities to invest in methods of multimodal transportation, staff propose that the city pursue grant funding to construct cycling infrastructure on the 17th Street corridor. And in requirement of that application, we'll need a council resolve in support of that application. With that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Excellent. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, just a question on what is covered by this grant. I mean, it's pretty exciting news that we could potentially see this project covered 100% by higher levels of government. I'll be crossing all my fingers and toes that this is a successful application, because it would be a great thing to see come out of doing some preemptive design work around this, that we could realize such a good investment with very little cost to our local residents. My question was, we just talked about it earlier about some of these assets that are requiring renewal for us to really proceed with this project. And would those asset renewals outlined in the previous report also be covered by this grant application?
Great question. So I can answer maybe the first part of that in terms of what is being attributed or funded through this grant application process. If we were successful in our grant application, we would see 100% funding, which would include consultation, design, construction, all the way to completion at 100% by the province and the feds. And in terms of linear infrastructure, it would not include any deficient linear infrastructure that would be required to be replaced from a life expectancy perspective. So for instance, if we have a water or a storm system that is in need of renewal, this is not included within that model.
That makes sense. So we'll look after our aging infrastructure, and then the higher levels of government will look after the rest, it sounds like.
That's correct, yes.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious whether or not staff considered any other projects in terms of this particular grant funding, and whether if we're successful with this grant, it makes it less likely that we would get support for other grant requests from this particular fund.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great question. One of the reasons this particular project was considered first and foremost for this grant application was because of the depth of involvement in consultation and conversation that's occurred, and that pre-work in terms of preliminary design to understand the full impact that this may have within the community. That puts us in a far greater in terms of the overall application. And in speaking to your second question, in terms of whether or not we would be less likely to achieve successful grant application in the future, the answer from the subject matter experts that I speak with, the people that we work with intimately in terms of developing these applications and submitting them, is one successful application doesn't deter a future successful application. So they're all looked upon on their own merits as to what they mean against the grant submitting forum, as well as the boxes that they check and what the impact net does have to the community. So we still stand a great chance as we go forward.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And if I could follow up, I noticed that there's going to be a letter of support from the school district. Is that right? Do we see the school district taking a more active role in actually looking for grants that support active transportation, or do they leave that to us?
I certainly can't speak on their behalf. I know to date we engage them as a stakeholder when we're working with infrastructure that has the potential impact in terms of the mobility of people that are on their way to those schools, and we look at the HASTE program that has input as well. We definitely reach out to them when the opportunity exists. We'd like to know that they're in favor of many of the things that we present, as well as they can have an active part of that communication.
Well, thank you. And I continue to appreciate city staff's efforts to collaborate with our partners in the community and projects like this and so many others. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I don't see any other further questions or comments. So starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton. Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
And Councillor Theos.
Favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Thanks very much. And moving right along, I believe we have another motion here.
Yeah, I'm happy to move this, Mayor. This is the resolution of council, isn't it?
Yep, the in-camera.
Yep. I'll move that a special in-camera meeting closed to the public will be held February 22nd, 2021 at the conclusion of the Committee of the Whole meeting pursuant to the following subsections of the Community Charter: 90 subsection 1 subsection C, labor relations and other employee relations, and 90 subsection 1 subsection K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages, and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public.
Second.
Excellent. Thanks for seconding that. I don't see any questions or comments. So polling council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
I read your lips that time. Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
And Councillor Theos.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Thanks very much. And moving on to unfinished business, ABICC motions, call for resolutions.
I'm happy to move this for you if you'd like.
Thanks you, Councillor Frisch.
So would you like me to read out the motion, and then I guess, am I technically moving that it's put forward to ABICC?
Yeah, I think that's how it would go. Yeah.
Sure. Also, I'll move that the following motion is forwarded to ABICC. Whereas costs, regulations, and responsibilities for municipalities are increasing at an unsustainable rate, and whereas some traditionally provincial or federal funded responsibilities have shifted to local government, therefore be it resolved that the province work with municipalities towards sharing sales tax, liquor tax, and property transfer tax, and further that the province support and simplify the creation of local fuel taxes for municipalities.
Second.
Thanks for seconding that. It was a scary pause there, but appreciate that. Are there any questions or comments? I know we've talked about this as a council on many occasions. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just trying to remember, did you not put a similar resolution forward last year?
I'm not sure that it actually went to ABICC. I know that we met and we've had these conversations with UBCM on a regular basis. And I'm not sure if Mr. Richta might know if we sent something to ABICC, but I don't recall that we did.
Thank you. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council, last year's ABICC was cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic, so we did not do any submissions at that time.
That explains it. Thank you. Well, Mr. Mayor, I think it's a good resolution. I wonder if you might consider, you've got 3 potential revenue sharing suggestions for the province. I don't know whether they're going to jump at any of them. You're also suggesting that the province support the creation of local fuel taxes. Could you perhaps just clarify what that is for people who may not be aware?
Absolutely, and you know, to be clear, I've been bringing these forward, I think, to provincial meetings probably at least for the last 2 years, and we did bring these up actually when we met with the Minister of Finance last year and the year before. At UBCM, not necessarily ABICC. And so I think the sales tax, liquor tax, and property transfer taxes are fairly well understood. The great thing about them is they also have a great track record, so we know what those numbers are, and it kind of is a known quantity. When we met with the Minister of Finance, they were much more focused on things like the cannabis tax that's new. However, at this point, we haven't seen any of those revenues shared, although there have been many promises for it. I do look forward to those, but those conversations have already happened. But the sales tax, liquor tax, and property transfer tax is something that I know other municipalities have brought forward in the past, but just want to push it. To your point on the local fuel taxes, when we brought these other taxes forward, the Minister of Finance actually said and recommended that we look at a local fuel tax as a potential way of creating more revenue streams. And other cities, Vancouver, I think, and Victoria most notably, have done this. So I did follow up and was actually given, I think it was Squamish, the mayor of Squamish and I talked a few times as they were trying to do it, but actually getting from point A to point B was near impossible. And that's why I've said, you know what, if the province says that this is a viable way for us to generate another stream of revenue, then it should be simplified, and they should work with us to make sure that we're able to make that happen.
Thanks very much.
No problem. With that, I see we've got a few questions, starting with Councillor Theos. And it might be a comment. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I know last year or the year before that, when we had a conversation about revenue streams, and I was bringing up about the concept about having the provincial sales tax contribution going towards municipalities, and maybe a 1% or something to that effect, being a steady and consistent stream of funds that we can rely on. And I remember I was talking to you about the example of Suma in Saskatchewan, and the fact that Saskatchewan has been actively, as a province, been receiving funding from the provincial government, from the PST, for years now. I'm just questioning whether you've had some research in regards to the Saskatchewan model, and maybe using that as leverage to work towards the BC government following a similar model.
Absolutely, and in fact, in 2 years ago when we met at UBCM with the Minister of Finance, I did bring up those examples, and I brought them up again with our MLA. And I mean, of course, a year ago or 2 years ago was now a completely different world than what we're looking at now. But I think, especially, and I have sent off that email regarding the $100 million to tackle homelessness right now, and there is, I think, some alignment there. I think that the province is really trying to get things done. The challenges, of course, they've themselves have committed a lot of money, which limits their ability to share a bit. But I think what the sharing does is it really recognizes the amount of regulation and downloading that's happened to municipalities that's increased our costs. And sales tax, to me, the example that I gave at the Minister of Finance is the cost of, say, solid waste, which has gone up exponentially over the last 10 years or so, and rightfully so, to make sure that we're looking after our environment. However, the cost to deal with that, unfortunately, haven't kept up, and that's where something like the sales tax could be used specifically for that, or not. So, yeah.
Thank you for following up on that conversation, Mayor.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to have those conversations. Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. I just wanted to make a brief comment. There's a statistic which I think is pretty commonly known in local government circles, but may not be so much for people who are watching, members of the general public, and that's that out of every dollar of taxes paid by any Canadian, roughly 8 cents go to the local government level, which is a remarkably small fraction of the whole. You consider the number of services that we're delivering. And particularly in times like COVID, where we're doing everything we can to take care of the entire community and having to fill gaps that are left open by the feds and the provinces, it's even more of a challenge. And finally, that we're, unlike the federal and provincial governments, which ran staggering deficits to handle COVID, I think the federal deficit is over $400 billion this year. We're legally required to balance our books each and every year, and we do. And I think it's a testament to careful management that we've managed to do that well this year. But I think with an eye towards the future, I think that seeing if we can get a more equitable deal from the province in terms of sharing its tax revenues, I'm 100% behind this. So thanks for putting this forward.
Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton. And I think the other side of that stat that you gave, that 8% or 8 cents on the dollar, is how much is spent in local municipalities, which I believe is over 60%. And so little of the tax dollars go directly to us. And so what ends up happening is a system where there's grant opportunities, but we're really, one municipality is basically fighting another municipality for those dollars. Whereas if we went to a system like this where it was more known, you could budget much more effectively. And as a business person, to me, cash flow is really one of those things where you want to have something that's relatively stable. And when you're dealing with major infrastructure projects that are contingent on grant funding, I think a great example might be the 5th Street Bridge, where the cost of repair while waiting for grant funding went up again exponentially. I think under $1 million to over $6 million over the life of actually getting the project underway, and that just is untenable. And I don't think it's fair to taxpayers to have to be within a system like that. So thanks very much for bringing that up. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for bringing this forward. I just wanted to point out, as of course everyone here in this meeting probably understands, is that there are some common sense ties between these taxes and a lot of the costs that we are bearing as a municipality. You already mentioned consumer waste and how that ties to sales tax, but also with liquor tax, there's a lot of social programs that we run that are related to that. And with property transfer tax, of course, we're doing a bunch of projects in the world of housing and non-market housing. And finally, really happy to see you put the local fuel taxes on there, as we just discussed, the large cost to move to multimodal transportation. So thanks for bringing that forward.
Thanks very much, and I really want to thank staff as well. This motion did start out much longer and possibly less articulate. It did have some of the points that I think you guys brought up, but a huge thanks to Mr. Richta, who spent time last week to make sure that it looked as good as possible. And there's no way I could have made it look this good. So I do appreciate that. And when it comes through to ABICC, if it's not part of the block vote, I'd be happy to speak to those finer points of these, which I think we've talked about individually. But again, sometimes a motion like this can lose some of that background information, but I'm pretty sure most of the municipalities across the province are going to be on board with this. So thanks for the supportive comments and the feedback. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Support.
And I'm in favor as well. And thanks for the support on that. I really appreciate it. Moving forward, Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'll move this next one. This follows up on the much appreciated support by this council for Help Cities Lead, a collection of policy initiatives to try and reduce carbon emissions from buildings. And I'll also give a bit of thanks for the drafting on this. I was very fortunate to have Don Lidstone take a look at this and put some edits into it. So it should have been one of the more tightly written resolutions out there. So whereas building retrofits help drive deep building sector emissions reductions, respiratory illness reductions, building operating cost reductions, and job creation, yet local governments are currently constrained within existing legislation. And whereas integral group modeling has shown that when implemented together, these 5 actions complement each other. Therefore, be it resolved that the Union of BC Municipalities prevail upon the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, and Attorney General and Ministry responsible for housing to move as quickly as possible and in close consultation with local governments to develop and implement the first 3 measures: regulating GHG emissions from buildings, home energy labeling, and property assessed clean energy, or PACE, enabling legislation, and also enable local governments to choose when ready to opt into the remaining 2 measures: regulating GHG emissions from existing buildings and building energy benchmarking and reporting.
Second.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Any questions or comments? I want to really just maybe if somebody's thinking of something to say, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, just a huge thanks for all the effort and time that you put into this file. I know I get an email, I think just about every week, about a climate caucus meeting and other meetings, and just to know that we have yourself on this file, and I know other councillors are spending time on files as well. But in particular, this here is something you've put a lot of effort into. You sit on some national boards as well in regards to this. And just the fact that you were able to bend the ear of Mr. Lidstone, I think speaks to the respect that he has for yourself and really the power that we have behind these kinds of motions. So really want to thank you very much for your efforts here. And with that, Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I'd like to echo a lot of what you just said, Mayor. It's really great to see this resolution coming forward and, see firsthand the work of pushing forward these initiatives at the provincial level. So really want to say thank you to Councillor Cole-Hamilton for all the work that's gone into this, and just highlight how well getting this legislation in place would fit with our objectives and our ambitions with our new OCP. So I'm hopeful that we'll see this go ahead, and I think it could lead to some real movement on our local reductions. And this is a pressing issue that's top of mind all the time, and it's great when we have some constructive solutions in front of us, and also just how well aligned this is with what the provincial government is considering, and that the top three are already in the mandate letters. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some progress on this soon.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll echo those congratulatory comments of gratitude to Councillor Cole Hamilton. I do note that we have a new government in the largest economy in the world that not only acknowledges that climate change is real and something needs to be done about it, but has moved to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. And I believe it's going to be one of the subjects of discussion between our Prime Minister and the new President of the United States. Perhaps they met yesterday. Anyway, I think that this is an initiative that bears watching. One of the particular things I like about it is the ability to engage local people in doing something constructive. And I wondered to that end if Councillor Cole Hamilton has any views on how widely aware the community might be of energy conservation related to housing, and the potential for this type of a program, and if there might be some value in doing some local promotion of this program and a resolution like this in order to make more of our citizens aware that these possibilities may be coming.
May I respond, Mayor?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, Councillor Hillian. I think that many people are aware of the importance of retrofits and of alternative energy, renewable energy. I think there's a general sense that that's a positive step towards addressing climate change, and it's also a way to long-term save money on your fuel bills. So I think that awareness is there. As to these kinds of specific initiatives, I think people are probably less aware. I do know from experience that when I talk, I find the easiest one to explain quickly to people is PACE. When I talk about that, it's something that just, I think people instantly, really regardless of their position, even on climate change, see it as just a sensible way to update your building stock, to create jobs, and to and increase the value of people's homes. So I've really encountered, I think, genuine interest and enthusiasm, and a sort of an aha moment where people go, of course, that makes really good sense. So I'm hoping that there is a report commissioned by the provincial government, which is being prepared right now, and I believe is due at the early March, looking at PACE and other retrofit options at a very comprehensive level. And I'm hoping that when that's released, there will be certainly, I'll be part of the small groups that will try and generate a public discussion, if possible, about these options. There was a great article written by two of my PACE BC colleagues in the George Strait just last year, which provided a really good overview of the benefits of it. But I'm hoping this discussion will continue to build, because it seems the government has a strong interest in moving on these items. And also, just finally, because there's a strong interest on the industry side. I know after speaking to folks from Hakai Energy that they were very supportive of PACE, as I mentioned the other week, and I think that we'll see an interest from people who want to do the work and to improve the housing stock, that those people will also be part of bringing the conversation to the public.
Thanks very much for that response. I know that the local media monitor our council meetings, and I'm hoping that one of our intrepid reporters might pick up on this story and interview you and do a feature in the local newspaper to promote this more. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I think, you mentioned Hakai Energy, a local company. And I probably mentioned this as well before, but we did work with them at the regional district, and it was standing room only for people, and it really didn't cost the regional district anything other than the space. and Hakai really organized hundreds of homeowners in terms of moving forward with solar panels and other energy upgrades without, again, any cost to government, no taxes or anything. And so I think there's a really willingness out there. And so, yeah, I'd be really interested to see what the city or local government can do to help facilitate that local conversation. So, and with that, I see Councillor Theos, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, I did. Thanks very much, Mayor. No, I appreciate your answer in response in regards to your motion, Councillor Hamilton, Will Cole Hamilton, and my feelings in regards to the full disclosure is that it sounds like there's a real good buy-in from the builders and the energy sector, and of course the purchasers, the consumers at the other end. The mayor just talked about the staff involvement from a community level. My question's in regards to the just amount of time the staff believe that this may take from that perspective of the time management side of things, and if there are any costs associated that the municipality will be picking up, and just to have a bit of a broader picture of that and the way that will look in moving forward. Thank you.
And I'm not sure if staff are in a position to really answer that at this point in time. Mr. Kushner, did you want to take a stab at it? I don't know if this flows into those taxes I was asking him to share with us or not, but.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think it's, like I said before, it's early days. I know that Councillor Cole Hamilton commented about the potential of a third party doing administration work on behalf of the municipalities, but it's something we'll be looking at. But from the research that I've been able to do, again, very preliminary, but it shows very little impact to the city administration at this point. But we'll, of course, report back.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks for the questions, everybody. And again, thanks Councillor Cole Hamilton for bringing that forward. And with that, I will poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Frisch.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Next, we have the background document for the ABICC resolution. Somebody would like to move that?
Move receipt.
Second.
Excellent. And I think we'll pass this over to staff. I think Trevor Kushner. Or is it just for receipt?
Thank you, Mayor. It is for receipt, but I will pass this over to our corporate officer to provide some context.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. From the CEO to Mayor and Council. So resolutions that are endorsed to move forward to ABICC require a backgrounder document to support that resolution. And Councillor Cole Hamilton was kind enough to provide that information for staff in advance. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on a bit of a tangent, I'm wondering if we are moving forward with the ABIC resolution brought to us by our corporate officer, Ms. O'Connell, at the last council meeting, and whether we need a backgrounder for that as well. And that was a motion to do with cooperation with the province in relation to housing and homelessness.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hillian. So Ms. O'Connell will be preparing a briefing note based on the staff report that was brought forward, and that will be submitted along with the resolution by Friday's deadline.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Fantastic. If this was just for a receipt, then I'll assume that it's unanimous unless somebody wants to vote against it. And I don't see anybody doing that. So that'll be unanimous. And moving along, we have the delegation from the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition. And I'll just need somebody to move and somebody else to second.
Moving receipt, is that what we're doing here?
Yeah.
This is a follow-up, I'm assuming.
Yeah, this is just unfinished business, I believe.
Okay, I'll move
yeah,
that, thanks.
I'll second that.
excellent. And I see that Councillor Hillian would like to speak to it.
Thanks, Mayor. So I appreciate staff and the mayor putting this on the agenda. I know that we had a presentation some weeks ago from the Cycling Coalition advocating for the reconsideration of the width of the proposed cycling and pedestrian bridge, the multi-purpose bridge at 6th Street. And I think that while we did have a fair amount of back and forth at that time, we didn't necessarily give due consideration to that community request that we have a solid evaluation of what they were asking and make a decision one way or the other to accept or reject, reaffirm the original plan or not moving forward. Since that time, I note that we've had additional correspondence from the Accessibility Committee. And I believe we've had an additional letter from Mr. Holland, who's involved with the 6th Street Bridge Committee. I'd like to propose that we actually set this over to a future council meeting sometime later in March, when we can either reaffirm the original decision or make a different one, and that we would be able to fully consider the submissions that we've received to date and any subsequent submissions that we might receive during that period of time. I think that that would accomplish two things. First of all, it would enable us to give due regard to the community submissions that have been presented. There was some criticism that perhaps some key consultant groups had not had the opportunity to comment on the original report, not due to any fault of the cities, but just due to some circumstances. And that was in the case of the Accessibility Committee. And there was some suggestion that the Cycling Coalition didn't necessarily feel that their input had been duly considered. I think what we would do if we set this over to a new date to either reaffirm or reconsider is make sure that we are giving the due regard to those submissions from the community. And we might also be able to take into account any new information that comes to light during that time, including any efforts on the part of the community to offer support, excuse me, financial or otherwise, towards this proposed project. And if we can dispense with receipt, I'd be pleased to make a motion in that regard.
All right, I'm happy to consider receipt unanimous and open the floor for a motion.
Well, thanks, Mayor. In that case, I'll move that the question of the width of the proposed 6th Street bridge be put forward to a future council meeting for reconsideration.
I'll second that.
Excellent. It's been first and seconded. Thanks, Councillor Frisch, for seconding that. And I did, I've gotten some correspondence. I did speak with Judy Norbury last week from the Accessibility Committee to kind of walk through the process, et cetera. But I think this does give some more opportunity to make sure that we are contemplating all the concerns. Councillor Theos.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I appreciate the intent of putting this forward, but from my recollection, I do believe that the city did reach out to those organizations and ask for their comments, and I think that there was fairness in that regard. And further to that, I'm recalling that in order to receive grants or be eligible for grants, that having a decision on the width was part of that eligibility position for for the city to actually move forward with those grant applications and attempt to receive some funding towards this project. As the city had spent significant time and costs and energy in the proposals, and I think that we thought long and hard about the final outcome, and I would be very concerned about the costs and time to staff of going back to the drawing board and changing all of that.
Thanks, Councillor Theos. And next we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, and sorry I didn't mute myself while I ate the carrot. But I seconded the motion because I also think that people are interested in hearing the reasons for a decision, even though we've talked about them a lot, and maybe that needs to be said more formally. But I also have the same concern as Councillor Theos that, maybe we're making more work for staff here that we don't need to do, or maybe this just comes back with the report that we had before, along with any submissions that we've received at the city level, I suppose. But by the same token, I think we've given this a lot of thought, and no one from council that I know of is coming forward with the intent to change our previous decision. So I'm a little unsure whether or not it's actually worth the time, or if we just have a quick conversation about why we made the decision in the first place. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. And I mean, that is one of the reasons we brought this forward, is really just to close that loop. We did have that delegation, but Councillor Morin.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess I was wondering, because Councillor Hillian's motion was so succinct, I wondered if it included having staff look at any of the things that had been brought up by some of the correspondence that we've received after we did make that decision. I know that just today I was emailed an article about how Victoria has decided to widen some of their paths in that area because of similar concerns. So, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't want staff to have to do a lot of work, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to consider all the information that's coming in, and we have received a fair amount of it in support of widening. So I think it would be good for us to at least look at that information. So, Councillor Hillian, would that motion include having staff bring back some responses to some of that correspondence? Is that what your intent would be?
Yeah, may I respond, Mayor?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. I don't see this requiring any additional staff work. It's my understanding from staff that the decision on width, there still is time for that to be finalized before anything goes to design potential drafts later on in April, May. So I wouldn't see staff having to do any additional work. I simply feel that there may be more submissions coming from the community that could influence a potential decision, and maybe not. But I think if we set this for a date later in March, we would have an opportunity for that to happen and to either reaffirm or reconsider the decision. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my understanding as well, that we did have a little bit of wiggle room before that's rubber stamped. Thank you.
All right, and I'll maybe look to Trevor Kushner just to make sure that what we're saying is not too far off the mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. If it's council's intent to postpone this, that can certainly happen. The date that we would be looking at, of course, is the adoption of the financial plan. Frankly, the width of the bridge in terms of design won't have any impact to our placeholder in the 2021 financial plan. Whether we design a 4 meter or 4.8 or a 5 or 5.8 meter bridge, that design parameter is essentially the same. Understanding that the reason why council chose the 4 meter multi-use bridge was the distinction between a multi-use pedestrian bridge and a commuter bridge with separated dedicated bike lanes. That's the distinction. It's also important to consider for council is that with each meter width increase, there are unintended consequences. First and foremost, financial. We know that 1 meter width is about $1 million, and we start to encroach on the right of way, which is going to impact some neighboring businesses. So those are all, distinctions and characteristics that council needs to remember, but certainly this can be held off for a little while.
Thanks, Mr. Kushner. And I know when I was speaking with various folks last week about this, I don't think it was well known that we actually had a narrower width as the recommended or minimum. And as a council, we actually decided for the 4 meters, which was wider than what the minimum was. And again, I think that goes to your point, that we wanted to make sure that it was safe, but we didn't want it to be too wide so that it gets sort of designated as a commuter bridge. So with that, Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I certainly understand the good intention of postponing this for a later discussion, but I do wonder if it's time well spent. I certainly spent a lot of time reading emails and taking the feedback that we've been provided. I didn't see a whole lot there that made me want to reconsider my decision. And it would seem to me that bringing this back is because we've received information that council would like the opportunity to reconsider it. And so in my mind, I don't really see the need for another conversation around it. However, I would like to hear from staff as to whether or not some of the information that we were presented by the delegation, and I know there's been follow-up questions resulting from emails, if there's anything that staff would like to bring back and provide additional information on, or if there would be any changes to the information that we received in that initial staff report, or if things are basically as they were when we first considered this.
And I'll pass it over to Trevor Kushner. I see he's got his hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll pass this over to Chris Davidson, our Director of Engineering Services, and he'll be able to elaborate on some of that stakeholder feedback that you're referring to, Councillor McCollum, and some of the decision points and the history and context. Chris?
Thank you, Trevor. Through the CIO to Mayor and Council, the short answer is no. A lot of the information presented by stakeholders was not new. Some of it was just presented in a slightly different light. There was nothing there that would really push staff to changing the recommendation. I'd like to note that we've had 2 independent consultants review our scenario and cyclist loadings and pedestrian loadings, and both have confirmed the recommendation for 4-meter bridge width. So at this point in time, there's been no information presented that would lead staff to change that recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess I came into this meeting kind of assuming that today was the day we're going to have the discussion that Councillor Hillian was talking about, and I went through and I reviewed the January and December memos, the two external reports you spoke about, and the information from Cycling Coalition, the email from the Accessibility Committee, and out of that I came. I found it was not much there that changed my opinion, and the question I had was similar to Councillor McCollum's, whether because we're not all traffic experts or experts on cycling flow, whether anything had changed their opinion. And I'm hearing that there is none of the information received since the reports that are being produced by our professional staff, none of those have served to change their impression. Anyway, I'm questioning whether there's a need necessarily to put this over to a further meeting, given that we all had noticed that it was going to be on today's agenda, and hopefully it had a chance to give it some thought. But if this allows people to put this away, to square this away as a decision which is being considered, I'm not averse to that, but I do question whether we need to go another month or so into this process and during the budgeting period to reaffirm our decision, since it's on today's agenda. I guess if the one thing I would like to ensure is that if we do put this over to another date in March, that if we could just have just a confirmation at that point, again, just in a very short staff report, that all the information that's been reviewed since the last staff report has been considered, and that the recommendation on width either stands or does not stand at that point. It sounds like currently 4 meters is still the recommendation by our professional staff. But yes, I think I'm not sure I see the need for a further meeting, but since there doesn't seem to be a will to discuss this evening, perhaps that we may need to do so.
Yeah, and Councillor Cole-Hamilton, maybe to your point, we may have just finished talking about 70% of what we would talk about in a month. So maybe I'll put it back to Mr. Kushner. I see you have your hand up again, because maybe it does make sense if there is no new information. But Mr. Kushner?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Maybe I'll pass this to our corporate officer, and Wendy Srisha can provide some context as to why this is actually on the agenda.
Thank you. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council. So this item came back onto the agenda in response to the Cycling Coalition's delegation at the January 18th regular council meeting, as discussed earlier, requesting council to reconsider its December 9th decision to proceed with the 4-meter wide multi-use active transportation bridge. At the January 18th meeting, the coalition summarized their request to consider implementing a separated bike and pedestrian lane, the constructed bridge deck, and that be increased to a width of 4.8 meters, at least 4.8 meters, and asking to revisit public engagement on the project and to update the cycling network plan related to this asset. So that's where we're at today. So staff are suggesting that council provide direction how council wishes to close the loop with the coalition, whether it's a letter of acknowledgement, which includes council's position on the bridge design, that would be appropriate, or if council wishes to discuss and provide new direction to staff.
All right. Councillor Cole-Hamilton, did you have a follow-up that you wanted to do? I saw your hand just ever so briefly.
Just hit the wrong button, Mayor. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ms. Shrista, for that clarification. Appreciate it. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I had another follow-up question. If we were to push this conversation another month to revisit our decision, I'd like to hear from staff whether or not there is some other impacts that we're not aware of doing that. I recall when we discussed this initially that was the time for the decision point. And I mean, we've heard from our CAO that it does impact the 5-year financial plan, although not the budget for 2021. But in terms of when we would, is it going to have impacts into additional work or delay the RFP? We did hear, I believe the Cycling Coalition reported back to us that the hard deadline is actually off in May, but that I was under the impression that the optimal time to provide the decision point was actually when we first discussed this. So I'm wondering if I could just get a little bit of clarity on what the repercussions of delaying further instruction on this would be.
Back to you, Trevor Kushner.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, that's a great question. I think from staff's perspective, we understand that the decision has been made and we've aligned our work plan accordingly. My point earlier was that because we don't actually start on detailed design until we have an adopted financial plan, which will happen in the first week of May, roughly, we don't embark or initiate that work. So we do have some time, but I just want to reiterate clearly that staff's recommendation was a 4-meter wide multi-use pedestrian bridge, and that's our position now. And as far as staff is concerned, that decision has been made, and that this was a way to wrap up the significant stakeholder engagement that the Cycling Coalition has done, and they've been really good partners on this project in terms of that collaboration. But in our mind, in our view, that decision has been made, and that this was a way to sort of wrap that up and then move forward with the financial plan.
Thanks for that.
All right, and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I'm hearing from staff that of all the information that we've received from the public since our decision, none of it actually changes their recommendation, and doesn't add any significant new information other than, of course, some opinions that we should be spending more money building a wider bridge, offering more service. But that doesn't change my decision either. So I'm actually going to vote opposed to this motion, and then if it doesn't pass, I'll actually make a motion to reaffirm our decision and send. I don't know if we even need to send a letter. I think that they'll just find out about it when they watch the video. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch and Councillor Cole-Hamilton. Well, just one, if we do, well, we'll talk about it when we get to those things, but Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. And just one final thing I wanted to confirm with staff is I believe there were efforts made by staff last fall to try and contact the Accessibility Committee, and there were just challenges in getting through. It's also my understanding there was a meeting recently with the Accessibility Committee, and I just wanted to ask two questions. One is, the staff feel that they managed to get a kind of consultation they were wanting to get in from that meeting? And I guess two, given that they were not able to gain input from the Accessibility Committee earlier in the process, does the contents of that meeting, did that change in any way the thoughts about the 4-meter recommendation? It sounds like not, but I believe it's important just to confirm this important voice was properly heard in this process.
All right, Trevor Kushner, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pass this over to Chris Davis to answer those questions.
Thank you, Trevor, through the CAO to Mayor and Council. Yes, we did get the consultation we wanted. Thank you very much. They were great to work with. We got lots of great information, really positive meeting. Learned a number of things from them, not just on bridge width, but other considerations from them as well. So yes, we did get a lot of great information. That being said, would the input from that Accessibility Committee sway the recommendation? No, I don't think so, not at this point in time. However, we did take note of that, and we will be carrying that forward for consideration during the detailed design phase.
All right, thanks, Chris, for clarifying that. And in my conversation also with Judy, you know, sort of that clarification when one of the comments is about, you know, where we're going to be 20, 30, 40 years from now. I think one of the big things that's a bit of an unknown right now, but we're going to be renovating and resurfacing our 5th Street Bridge this year, but it will have a finite lifespan as well. And so if that lines up in that 30-year plan, then that becomes an opportunity possibly when that bridge gets replaced to replace it with something a little bit more significant, which, you know, again, if we've got the time to plan for it and budget for it and save for it, then that's another opportunity out there. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm getting the feeling that the writing may be on the wall, but I'll just make one final comment in that regard. It was always my hope that this proposed bridge, from its origins as a complete community project, would have a significant amount of community engagement in its building. And the intent of my suggestion tonight is simply to put this on the agenda later in March, maybe even March 15th, to see if in fact there is more coming from the community in that regard. We've essentially had notice since Friday that this was on the agenda, and maybe the discussion that's taking place tonight is sufficient, but I'm simply requesting that we give an additional period of time to see if there's more engagement potentially coming from the community about contributing to this bridge as a community project. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian, and I should probably apologize as well. I believe your motion should have been limited the rest of the discussion to time and place, whereas again, I think we may have had the bulk of a conversation that may have happened later on. But with that, I see no further hands going up, so I'm going to poll council now, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I feel that we did have a chance to discuss this in January, and I feel that since then we've heard quite a lot of response from the community. I've had a chance. I thought we were going to be discussing it this evening. I fully reviewed the community feedback myself, and the reports, and the presentation by the Cycling Coalition, and I've heard today from staff that in their view, having looked at all the input from the community, that the recommendation they've made in their professional opinion still stands. So I'd prefer to continue with the discussion we're having tonight if we're going to have one, since we've all prepared for it. And I will, with all due respect, I will actually vote no on this resolution.
Thanks, Cole Hamilton. Councillor Frisch.
I'm also opposed.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
I'm opposed.
Councillor Morin.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm opposed.
And I'll vote opposed as well. All right, with that, Councillor Frisch.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, here's another opportunity to discuss if you guys want. I'll move that we reaffirm our decision for the 4-meter wide bridge, pedestrian cycling bridge.
All right, thanks, Councillor Frisch. That's been seconded by Councillor Cole Hamilton. Thanks very much. And with that, I do see Councillor Hillian. Did you have a comment or?
Well, thanks, Mayor. I mean, I think effectively the vote that just took place did in fact reaffirm that decision. So I'm not sure what the point of this motion might be, other than to provide a venue for further discussion.
Yeah, I think that was one of it. So, I mean, if there is any further discussion, I think one of the things that was brought up by Councillor Frisch earlier is whether or not a letter acknowledging the input from the Cycling Coalition, and I think, frankly, the accessibility, whether or not they should get letters. I think it might be appropriate that we send them just an acknowledgement, and possibly the rationale that we did actually choose a width that's wider than what was recommended, that this is not a commuter bridge, so we don't want this built to a standard that will potentially have people moving at speeds that are incongruent to people that are walking or using any kind of mobility aids or walking. And that we also have the potential to look at the replacement of that 5th Street Bridge, which is, of course, in the future, but on that time horizon that I think was brought up as a concern. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and happy to see that amendment in the motion, if that's fine with Ms. Richta. I think those two organizations would definitely appreciate the letter. So what I was going to say though was that you know, I was advocating for a bridge in 2012 when this idea first came up, and I'm a huge supporter, obviously, and would love nothing more than a wider bridge, whether that's 4.8 or 5 or 6 meters. I just know bigger is always better, and more space is better. But when you look at the cost of it, it's really hard to swallow. And I've done a lot of planning around other construction projects, and you always want to do the best that you can, but really it's the best that you can afford to do at that point. And so some people think maybe it's short-sighted, but on the other hand, like you pointed out, who knows what's going to happen in 25 or 30 years and what other opportunities there will be to expand our network. And I'm quite confident that this will be a huge upgrade to our active transportation network and will do us well for easily 10 or 20 years. So with that being said, I do appreciate all the feedback and the push from all those community groups to get a little bit better of a bridge, but I think this is going to be amazing for the community. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch, and I think you brought up a good point on the previous bridge plan, which started out fairly modest. You know, by the end of the day, with all the input, it was actually going to be designed so that emergency vehicles could cross over it. And of course, with that, the escalated costs basically, I think, killed that project. And so I really appreciate your feedback. With that, Councillor McCollum.
pressing lower hand rather than unmute. Yeah, I just want to speak in favor of the motion. I think there's value in providing a formal response to both organizations. While I didn't land on the same side of this decision as the feedback that they provided, I certainly really appreciate hearing from both groups. And I think receiving a level of engagement that we've received already on this bodes well, and I hope that they'll continue to support the project, even if it's not exactly how they envisioned or the ideal scenario. I certainly agree with Councillor Frisch's points that, I mean, there's definitely always bigger is better, but whether or not we can, meet that goal is another question entirely. And I was just thinking back to when we first passed the motion to proceed with this bridge, the option on the table that we were kind of weighing numbers with when the cantilevers were decided against. The two options were fairly close to one another. I believe the cantilevers were about 1.5 million, and we were imagining that we could proceed with this project for about 2. And so it's more than doubled, and we haven't really started yet. So the idea of adding yet another close to $1 million onto the project, I want this project to proceed. I want to see it successful, and I think increasing the scale of it is not going to get us to that goal. So I just want to reiterate that council is behind this, and this is the best way for us to move forward.
Thanks, Councillor McCollum. And next we have Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just, as I said, I did some reading and some over the weekend and beforehand. I just wanted to sort of, come up with some of my thoughts. While I have similar views on the finance issue, I want to look at the actual width issue on its merits. So I just want to start off by saying thank you to staff for the excellent reports and to the Cycling Coalition for their work on both the active transportation count in 2019 and the analysis of the bridge width that they recently shared with Council, and the Accessibility Committee for the guidance they've shared with City staff. In considering this issue, I've reviewed the presentation materials from the Cycling Coalition, the staff reports from January 2020, December 2020, BC active transportation guidelines, as well as looked at multi-use bridges in other communities. And I see it as coming down to 2 essential issues. The first is, should there be a separation between different modes, cyclists and other users? And if so, what is the appropriate width? And the 4.8 meter width that's been suggested, which would break down to 3 meters for cyclists and 1.8 meters for pedestrians on one side, would allow for what was described as a pedestrian zone that would be rather tight, even at 4.8 meters. And the separation that's been envisaged here would have cyclists on one side and pedestrians in a thin strip on the other. Given that there's a bridge and beautiful river views on each side, I think it's completely understandable that you'd probably find pedestrians on both sides of the bridge. And people who are entering from the park side would naturally tend to stay on the right and be on the upriver side. So it would be difficult to see how one could have separated cycling facilities along with pedestrians on both sides. And just an observation about multi-use paths. I was down on the Riverway this weekend for the coldest night of the year walk, and one of the things I noticed is that when you're walking on a multi-use path, people stop unexpectedly. They gather to talk to friends, often filling the whole path. Dogs pull to one side, at least certainly mine does, and children occasionally run from one side to the other. And they'll do this regardless of markings, and this is what they should be doing. And I think, and we saw even in one of our reports, the 6.2 meter wide Peace Bridge in Calgary, which is an enormously wide bridge. It was referred to as being notorious for pedestrians wandering off the raised sidewalk and into the marked cycling area. And this tells me that even on a separated bridge, and even on a very wide separated bridge, cyclists must proceed with caution, knowing that they may need to yield at any point. The unfortunate thing is separation tends to lead to the exact opposite behavior. It seems to lead to greater speeds by cyclists, which is partially based on the assumption that they have a lane that's exclusively for their use. So I can easily foresee such user conflicts even on a wider bridge. especially as the pedestrian zone, which is being suggested, is just a 1.8 meter strip down one side. I don't think you'd find people, children, and dogs all keeping themselves carefully in that 1.8 meter strip. It's just not a realistic expectation. In my view, an increase in width to accommodate separation of modes would be an increase in cost, but unfortunately would not be an increase in safety. As was noted, even the 6+ meter bridge in Calgary had considerable problems with pedestrians and cyclists entering each other's spaces unexpectedly. So separation doesn't necessarily seem to lead to the safer circumstances that we'd expected. It actually exacerbates the problem by giving people the anticipation that they will have a clear route in front of them. So if we're not going to separate users, if we're going to be having a mixed-use bridge, what's the right width? And our consultant, Dan Casey, who literally wrote the book on active transportation, he wrote was one of the authors of the BC Active Transportation Guidelines that we've all been referring to, recommended 4 meters. And we were told that the projected usage for 2049, almost 30 years from now, was 1,171 users per day, and that could be safely covered by a 3.5 meter bridge. We instead chose a 4 meter bridge, which would be safe for up to 1,400 users a day. So more than 20% more than are projected could still be very safely served by a 4 meter bridge. And 20% is 30 years from now. That's a considerable contingency margin to build into it. And in comparison to the challenges on the 6.2 meter bridge in Calgary, I note that a number of busy urban trail systems like Central Valley Greenway in Burnaby and the North Shore Spirit Trail in North and West Vancouver do choose to use unseparated 4 meter bridges throughout the entire length of their system. And the Galloping Goose Trail in Victoria often uses 4 meter bridges. I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to listen to the presentations of the Cycling Committee, both in an informal meeting in December and when they presented in January. And after reviewing their materials, after reviewing our staff reports, and having heard from the staff today, I come to the conclusion that an unseparated path will have the greatest likelihood of keeping users safe and keeping speeds of movement down, and that a 4 meter width is sufficient to handle the anticipated use right up until the middle of this century, and even has capacity for up to 20% more users than are anticipated. So given this analysis and the fact that staff have confirmed that they've received all the information that's occurred since the last report, and it hasn't changed their assessment on width the bridge, and also given the many demands on our limited budget resources, I come to the conclusion that 4 meters is a width that's safe and a responsible choice for our community. And I realize it's not what a lot of people would have liked. Bigger is better. It would be wonderful to have a 6 or 7 meter wide bridge with a viewing platform in the middle. But we live in a world where we have to make choices between many different important priorities. I feel that we're making this a priority, and we're doing it comprehensively, and we're doing it safely. And I'm hoping that in future conversations with the community, that'll become more apparent. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Councillor Cole-Hamilton, for your very articulate explanation. It looked like your eyes were moving there, so maybe if you've got that written down, you could send that to staff, because that might be some very useful facts to put in the letter we're going to be sending, because I think it touched on many of the things. And again, when I was speaking with folks last week, doing the comparison of very wide streets and how people tend to drive faster, and that sort of mental calibration that happens that you've just articulated, I think is a big part of this conversation. Councillor Morin.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything left to say after that. I did have a few things to say, but most of them are probably covered. I wanted to say that, first of all, we way back, it was looking almost like we weren't going to have a 6th Street Bridge at all. So I think that moving forward, as I think Councillor McCollum said, is a positive in itself. I think that cyclists and those avid cyclists on council would be able to attest to this. Those that are commuting would be more likely to use the 5th Street Bridge. So hopefully cyclists are not going to be using this as a racetrack. So I think I've heard the points loud and clear, and in an ideal world we would have a wider bridge. I guess if the community came up with a couple $1 million to widen it, then perhaps we would look at it again. But I think that we've hit the compromise. I also want to note that we've received probably equally as many as much correspondence not wanting a 6th Street Bridge at all. So I think that, as Councillor Cole-Hamilton said, it's striking that balance. So thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Morin. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. So it may surprise you to learn that I don't disagree with what anyone has said here. I think that a 4-meter wide bridge is perfectly safe, and I think Councillor Cole-Hamilton made some good points. My concern was doing as much as possible to provide incentive to the community to get behind this bridge and even raise money to help construct it. And if the possibility of doing it wider was going to do that, I simply wanted to allow some more time to see if that could potentially happen. That's not going to happen, so that takes that equation off the table. I turned off the camera a minute ago because I'd been promising myself for some time that I would actually take out my tape measure and stretch it across the floor to get a sense of how wide we're talking about. It's not a bad exercise to do, simply to give yourself a sense of how much 4 meters actually is. And by coincidence, I was watching a travelogue on Ireland yesterday, and I would invite people to look up the bridge the Peace Bridge that runs from Derry to Londonderry, and that was built to reinforce the Northern Ireland Peace Accord between those two separate warring communities. It's a spectacular spiral bridge, 4 meters wide. So, you know, I'm going to vote in favor of the motion, and I just wish that there had been more opportunity for the community to engage and get behind this project, potentially with some the raising of some funds. That's not going to happen. Well, maybe it'll happen all the same, but in any case, I will support the motion going forward.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And I think, you know, you bring up a good point, and I know I brought it up with the Cycling Coalition and with many other folks. And in fact, the original bridge, you know, the Rotary Club that I'm in, you know, had put significant resources, and I think there's certainly the opportunity still to get that buy-in, whether that's again in the letters that we send out to the two organizations that we've already identified, but possibly even widening that net to local service clubs and other organizations to see if there are people out there that are willing to work towards this common goal for something that really is going to benefit the entire Comox Valley. Sorry, Councillor Hillian, I may have prodded you to say something else.
Well, thanks, Mary. I did just want to add that part of the dialogue that I think has gone on in the last couple of weeks after the original presentation, to me has exemplified exactly what happens when the community puts its mind towards getting engaged with the project. And I heard some excellent suggestions come forward, such as the potential of a naming an ability to name the bridge in exchange for a sizable donation from a community group. The potential of, I believe what Councillor Morin had previously mentioned about some of the artwork and signage and such on the bridge coming from separate grants and processes. I would still like to see that this becomes a project that the community gets behind, because I think it will be a tremendous asset to our community regardless of width. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. Great words. Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I was just going to echo Councillor Hillian's comments. I would love to see greater community support, and if people are interested in fundraising and trying to contribute to this community amenity, that would be greatly welcomed. And I thank him for raising that idea.
Excellent. With that, we have had a very robust conversation, and I want to thank everybody for being part of this. And for those that are watching, hopefully you've heard, I think, a lot of really good, articulate, and heartfelt thoughts from Council. With that, I will poll Council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
In favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Thanks very much for that. And we do have a notice of motion from Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. This is related to speed limits and safety signage on multi-use paths, coincidentally. Whereas the city's multi-use paths have become increasingly busy with pedestrian, bicycle, and e-bike traffic, and whereas significant safety concerns have been expressed by path users, particularly around cycling speeds and pathway sharing, therefore be it resolved that staff prepare a report that outlines options for implementation of increased safety measures, such as speed limits and signage. And there should be a comma there. These are 3 separate points. That researches these measures and their impacts in other communities, comma, and that pilots these measures on the Air Park River Ray Trail and the steep section of McDonald Road, Lerwick Road area.
All right. Thanks very much for that notice of motion, Councillor Morin. I really appreciate it. I know we've spoken a little bit around these items, and look forward to it coming forward to a future council meeting. Councillor,
do we need a seconder for that, or?
With a notice of motion, I believe it's going to come forward as a motion in the future.
Okay. Okay.
All right. But people can speak to it. Councillor Hillian.
Well, thanks, Mayor. I would have welcomed it as an actual motion, but I think that particularly given the discussion we've had tonight, it's useful as a notice because it provides the opportunity for some community input prior to us actually voting on it. I'm sure we'll vote in favor of it, and I would look forward to hearing from staff at some point what they're doing in other communities to manage these types of issues. We do see reports of Galloping Goose and trails like that in Victoria, which there's pressure on to widen and to make more available to the incredible use that they're getting. And I think it's a tribute to the interest in fitness and outdoor recreation, particularly during a pandemic, as we've seen that our facilities need to be re-examined in terms of their capacity to manage the growth that we're going to see in the years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hillian. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I've got dogs barking in the background too. Sorry about that. I was just as a matter of procedure, I was going to point out that I think notice of motions should just be received, and that would make it simpler. But of course, if you had brought it forward as a motion, I would have supported as well. So thanks very much, Councillor Moore.
Fantastic. All right. So, and I think again, that is the power of a notice of motion, is it gets people thinking about it a little bit more than possibly if you get it on a Friday and we're going to be talking about it on a Monday. So it does give a little bit more forethought. And again, I'm sure that this type of report's going to get engagement from user groups as well, just not unlike the bridge, to make sure that we're making sure that we're taking everybody's thoughts into into account. One thing I wanted to say just before we go to adjournment is just a huge congratulations to our community. I know a lot of us on council here and hundreds of people across the valley were part of the coldest night of the year that happened, well, over a period of time, but Saturday was kind of the one of the big parts of that. And the fact that we raised well over 100%, depending on which teams you look at. But as a valley, we did an amazing job, and as a country, we did absolutely amazing as well. So I just want to thank everybody that was part of that. And with that, I'll take adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none?